A journalist in Gaza discovered live on air that his family had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. Veteran reporter for Al Jazeera, Wael Dahdouh, was working live when he learned that his wife, son, daughter and grandson were all killed. His family was apparently south of the Wadi Gaza line. Now that's where Israel told Palestinian civilians to evacuate to in order to be safe.
Of course, we are in a big calamity right now, a big tragedy. Especially it's perpetrated against women and children. No more, no less than a calamity. Large numbers of people's houses bombarded. However, this is a custom of the Israeli occupation.
A journalist in mourning there. Well, 24 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began. On October the 7th, we're joined now by Jodie Ginsberg from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jodie, thanks for being with us. What's your view right now on the present situation?
It's calamitous. This is unprecedented. CPJ has been documenting attacks on journalists for more than 30 years, and we have never seen anything like this. As you said, 24 journalists killed in less than 3 weeks. For context, last year, when obviously we had the ongoing war in Ukraine, 67 journalists and media workers were killed throughout the world in total in the entire year. And so we've basically seen more than a third of that number in the space of just over 2 weeks.
And how important for you, for all of us, is the presence of a war reporter on the battlefield? Because some might say a journalist doesn't need to be there because they're risking their lives. But tell us, from your perspective, how important it is that someone is there to witness what happens.
Well, you know the old adage that truth is the first casualty in a war. It's absolutely vital that we have people in a conflict who are able to report on what's going on. And what I would say in this context, of course, is that many of these individuals are not war reporters. They're journalists who happen to be in Gaza where war has come to them. We saw something similar in Ukraine. And there is nowhere for those people to go, nowhere for those journalists to go. They're reporting on their communities, on their families. So yes, it is dangerous to be a war correspondent. It's always dangerous to go into battle. It's even more dangerous when you don't choose to. And what I would really stress is that journalists are civilians in any conflict, and they should be treated as such.
Indeed, Wael Dahdouh didn't expect to have the terrible loss that he's going through right now. And as you say, many journalists find themselves as much the victims as anybody else in these kind of circumstances.
Exactly. It's really hard to report in any kind of war. There's limited personal protective equipment for journalists in Gaza. And it's incredibly challenging because you want, as a journalist, to report what's happening. But what's happening is also that civilians are being bombarded in this conflict, and therefore you as a journalist are in the front line at all times.
Are there cases, and I think there are some cases, but I'll let you elaborate on this, are there cases when journalists are actually targeted by one side or another?
It does happen in conflicts. It's very difficult to say at this stage in this conflict whether that has happened. We obviously call for investigations in all such cases so that it's clear what has happened. We have seen cases where journalists have been clearly wearing their press insignia. You saw in the clip of Wael the press insignia on his vest there in the video. And we do know in one case, the case of a journalist, Issam Abdallah, the Reuters journalist who was killed on the Lebanese-Israel border a couple of weeks ago, that he was with a group clearly wearing their press insignia when they were hit by a strike that came from Israel. The Lebanese government has called for an investigation. Reuters has called for an investigation. We seek an investigation. It's really important that we understand how those journalists, particularly those who aren't necessarily in and among civilians, as some of those who've been killed have been in airstrikes, come to have been killed.
Indeed. I know the case I'm going to cite next isn't part of this conflict that is happening right now, but the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, for instance, May 2022. She was killed while reporting on what was happening between the Israeli army and Palestinian civilians. There was a lot of misinformation about what happened in that particular incident, but I think in what happened next, it was discovered that she was indeed targeted.
Well, we're still calling for an investigation and for the Israeli Defense Force to disclose precisely what happened. Certainly, all indications suggest that she may well have been targeted. She was certainly, again, like many of her colleagues, wearing a press vest that clearly marked her out. We and others have been calling for a long time for the Israeli Defense Force to clarify its rules of engagement, and they have declined to do so repeatedly. We actually issued a report earlier this year called Deadly Pattern that looked at the killings of over 20 journalists by Israeli Defense Forces and found no accountability. No one has ever been held to account in any of those cases. It's really important that both sides respect the rules of war. It seems ridiculous to say that there are rules in war, but there are rules in war, and that journalists are not deliberately targeted by either side.
Indeed, there are those conventions, and they are very serious indeed. Jodie, this year I've been to Ukraine, for instance. I've got friends and colleagues who are now in Israel and near to the border with Gaza. Does there come a point, in your view, when perhaps it's too dangerous to go? Or is, as we started with the first question, that idea of the truth, it's something that is just overall just too important not to let go of?
It's a really personal decision, and everybody has their own view of risk. My understanding as well was out there again today reporting, because that's his job, that to bring the facts to us, the public, to tell us what is happening in Gaza. It's a very personal decision. I know that newsrooms around the world take this extremely seriously and think very carefully about who and how they send people in. But we do need journalists to be the eyes and ears in these kinds of situations. In this environment where there is so much mis and disinformation, it's really hard for us who are outside of the region to understand what's happening. We need journalists who are able to provide us this kind of information, this independent information, so that we can make a judgment about what's happening in the area.
Jodie, thank you very much indeed. Jodie Ginsberg from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and observations with us about what is happening right now and the journalists that are at risk. We take a short break. After that, it's Eye on Africa. Stay with us for that.